Swami, what's the nature of the person in Hinduism? What are we fundamentally as body, mind, spirit, soul? And what happens to us? How does karma work? And the whole process of reincarnation.
Sure. So according to Hindu traditions, both the physical body and the mind are actually insentient. And the only difference between the body and the mind is that the body is a gross form of matter and mind is a subtle form of matter. And the soul, the sentient individual soul, is distinct from both the physical body and even the mind. And it's that soul, that immaterial soul, which is distinct from the body-mind complex, which takes physical embodiment again and again. That's the doctrine of rebirth. And in what circumstances we're reborn in is determined by the law of karma, which means we reap what we sow.
Okay, let's look at each of those parts. The body, I understand. Now, the mind, this subtle form of matter, what happens to that when we die?
It dissolves into the 5 elements, basically.
The 5 elements being just whatever.
Yeah, similar to us, but I think we have an extra. But so, water, air.
Yeah. In other words, it goes back to the earth.
Absolutely.
So it's really physical.
Yeah, it's very much physical.
But the soul is immortal, can't be destroyed.
Exactly. And it's conscious. The only conscious entity is actually the soul, rather than the body or even the mind.
So the body, mind, even together, are not conscious without the soul.
Not. Yeah.
And the souls are created by God or created by the cosmic consciousness? They're a piece of the cosmic consciousness?
Yeah, again, each tradition of Hinduism has a different answer, but they all agree that the soul is eternal. There's no question of God actually creating individual souls.
It always was eternal.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you could have eternal into the future, but not into the past.
Yeah, no, this is actually eternal into the past as well.
Okay.
But exactly what the relationship is between the eternal soul and God actually kind of differs from tradition to tradition.
Is there a finite number of souls?
That's a good question. Yes, I think there is, but they can inhabit different realms.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
I just want to know, looking at numbers, what they do and what they go, that's
there's a finite number of souls, and you can call them sparks of the divine, or, they're different metaphors.
Okay, all right. Because it's interesting to know whether it's finite or infinite. Because if you have cosmic consciousness, you theoretically could divide that into infinite number of parts. or manifestations. But
I'm inclined to say finite, but it's possible that across Hindu traditions there are different answers.
Okay, as with everything else. Yeah. Okay, so how does karma work?
Yeah, so the basic principle of karma in Hinduism is we reap what we sow.
Okay,
but the specific mechanics actually differs across traditions, and so according to some of them, the law of karma works very mechanistically. And if you do wholesome, unselfish, moral, spiritual actions in this life, you will be born into favorable or happy circumstances in your next life. You'll be born with a kind of cheerful disposition. You're going to find that, without even trying, people are going to favor you with all sorts of nice things, and you're not going to be born with a kind of depressive mentality, but you'll be born happy. But there are less mechanistic views of karma where, according to which a soul may actually choose to be born in what seem to be less favorable circumstances in the soul's next birth in order to make spiritual progress. Because it's a fact which I think all of us can agree on, that it's often through suffering that we learn more morally and spiritually than through our happy experiences.
So what's interesting to me is that the soul can participate in the karmic direction. Yeah. Karma is an algorithmic, I don't want to say mechanical, but it's some system or some equation or formula that works. You don't have to intervene in the process.
Right.
It's sort of an automatic. But then the soul can somehow influence that in like a negotiation.
Yeah, well, with God too. There's a third element which is very important.
I don't want to forget God.
Yeah, so there are some modern Hindu thinkers like Sri Aurobindo who say that there is this kind of algorithmic law of karma. At the same time, there are these two elements which are agential in a robust sense. So there's God, and God can actually suspend to a certain extent, or at least mitigate the effects of our karma if he chooses, and if he chooses to bestow his grace on us. And the other element is the soul itself, which has a kind of individual choice, again, according to some schools of Hinduism. And so between physical embodiments, the soul can actually have some say, not exactly going against the soul's karma, but in accordance with karma, it can decide, well, I think what would be most spiritually beneficial to me. In my last birth, I was a king, but I think it'll be better for me spiritually, and I'll make more spiritual progress if I'm born as a pauper in my next birth.
So what we have then is the primary determinant of the karmic direction is an algorithmic, something built into the fabric of reality. But God can influence that or not at God's choice.
Correct.
And that the soul is observing this and can have a seat at the table of decision. It may not. The soul may or may not be dispositive as where it goes, but at least it's part of the discussion.
Yeah, and I guess one thing to emphasize is that the soul is not sort of completely distinct from God, because the soul is always intimately related with God.
Okay.
So in a sense, God is, you can think of the soul as a kind of child of God, and so there's a kind of intimate collaboration between them.
Okay. And the whole karmic reincarnation process is to reach, to escape this cycle in a sense. And to have some permanence.
Absolutely, and that different traditions within Hinduism have radically different conceptions of what the ultimate picture of salvation is. Even the word salvation may have sort of more Abrahamic connotations, they don't use the words. But liberation, mukti is the term. Liberation from what? From rebirth. But what does that liberation look like, that liberated state look like? Devotional traditions within Hinduism, traditional schools of that believe in a personal God, they tend to conceive the final eschatological state as a kind of eternal heaven. It's called loka in Sanskrit. And it's an abode which is eternal, in which you can dwell in an eternal loving relationship with the form of the personal God that you love. And there's an entirely different paradigm of eschatology in the tradition of Advaita Vedanta, which is a non-dualistic school of Vedanta. That's the school of Shankara and his followers. According to the non-dualistic school of Vedanta, there's no going and coming. There are no eternal heavens. There are kind of temporary heavens which you can dwell in for some time, but ultimately, the ultimate state of liberation is one in which you just rest in your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness.
Whatever the ultimate state is, does everyone get there ultimately, however long ultimately takes?
Yes.
So-called universal salvation?
According to especially some modern Hindu schools, the one that I belong to is the school of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. We believe in universal salvation. There are a number of other Hindu schools which accept that. But that the form that salvation takes may differ from individual to individual. And the view I prefer is one that was espoused by Ramakrishna, a 19th century mystic. He used a really nice metaphor of eating sugar versus becoming sugar. And he says that the soul has a preference in this. And the soul may prefer to eat sugar, and by that he means the soul can choose in the final eschatological state to dwell in an eternal heaven with the personal God. But the soul can also choose to become sugar in the sense of just resting in its own nature as non-dual pure consciousness. And I like this both and approach to eschatology, which is that we can think of salvation as a kind of many-roomed mansion. And you can choose the room you want to dwell in. You can choose to dwell in the Christ room, or the Allah room, or the Vishnu room, or the non-dual pure consciousness room, but they're all sort of part of the same mansion.
Can you switch?
Sure, why not? Yeah, I think that there's a flexibility there, and some souls may, after a long time in a heaven, choose to dip into non-duality, and then maybe even dip back into it.
Can I, if I go into non-duality, can I come back as a...
Yeah, you can.
You can?
Yeah, I think that, again, it depends on the tradition, but in some traditions you can.
I want the tradition with the most flexibility.
That's the one, I'm with you on that.
Maybe I have to come with you to get that.
We're happy to have you on board.